Kia ora koutou, e whakarongo mai nei ki tēnei o Waka Hourua, Māori and Pacifica Suicide Prevention. Tiro I tēnei rangi ki ngā whakarongo ki ngā kōrero o ngā rangahau. So today we're going to listen to a research project that was funded by Waka Hourua. The first one up is Dr. Kath Love. Nā mihi atu ki a koe te whangaunga, te Aotearoa, nei rā te mihi. And your kōrero today will share the project you did on Ahikaa. You bring many talents with you today, both at a strategic level and grassroots, and we're privileged to have you here with us today.
Tēnā koe kahu, he mihi hoki, ki a koutou ngā hau e whae e wakarongo mai nei ki te kōrero mō tēnei rangahau. Yeah, it's a pleasure to be here this morning, and I'm assuming that I'll just hop straight into a PowerPoint presentation. I understand that I have 15 minutes, and I think we've over-prepared and probably put in a wee bit much information, so I'll go fairly rapidly through it, but we'll welcome any discussion and questions at the conclusion of the PowerPoint. So we'll just switch to our PowerPoint display. Okay, so this research was called Towards Mauri Ora, and it was looking at a new area in suicide prevention research, and that is the relationship between kaupapa Māori entrepreneurship education, community development, and suicide prevention. As we'll be aware, at the time that this research began, we were looking at the 2010 or the OECD report cited by the Public Health Advisory Committee in 2010. And our record was not good. The most recent UN report that has been released clearly has shown that things are not improving greatly, particularly in relation to disparities and poverty for Māori whānau. When we started this research, we realised that we would have to straddle, in a sense, two very discrete paradigms. One of these was the bulk of the international literature, which focused on risk and protective factors, a lot of it around suicide and suicide prevention. When we looked at our own ways of conceptualizing risk, however, we settled on a model which was first developed by the Māori whānau violence group, chaired by Kruger. And we looked at kahu and being, in a sense, the inability to see what is ahead. And the quote from Kruger there, if you are kahu then you are spiritually blind. You have no ulterior purpose or meaning in life. Physical life is but a drudgery. So that was at one end of the continuum for our suicide risk. At the other end, in terms of protection from suicidality, was the concept of Mauri Ora, which we will all be familiar with, being the spark, the essence of being, and life force. And Kruger et al. Of the whānau violence group said that Mauri is like the centre that drives people. When they have Mauri, there is a sense of purposefulness, they are inspired, they have these intangible qualities that motivate them. So when we're looking from a kaupapa Māori perspective at suicide and suicide prevention, these are the essential elements of the continuum moving towards Mauri Ora as the chief protective force for our whānau. Now, entrepreneurship may seem a strange thing to be bringing into a suicide prevention discussion and research, but if you look at what entrepreneurship is, It's about a particular mindset that emphasises creativity, optimism, resilience, and persistence. It's about a set of skills that include things like opportunity recognition, observation, communication, planning, getting to know ourselves and our environment, really. And it includes entrepreneurial action, which is about initiating, leading, trying, following your dreams and passions, utilising your strengths and addressing our weaknesses. So the link between kaupapa Māori entrepreneurship education and suicide prevention hadn't been investigated before. But in around 2012, it was Kere Lawson Te Aho who had some contact with the entrepreneurship, Ahikaa entrepreneurship education programs we were running, who commented on the link between suicide prevention factors and what the entrepreneurship education programs were teaching. So for us, we conceptualise entrepreneurship really as being about reclaiming rangatiratanga in a variety of ways. Our ability to do, to act on and in the world, our ability and motivation to create, to have efficacy, to be effective in the world, to provide for ourselves and others, to have a role to play in our communities and our whānau, and for us to move together. Really, we view the entrepreneurship, Ahikaa entrepreneurship education programs as taking a community-driven public health approach rather than an individualistic type of approach. So we're looking at really in the research the connections between the kaupapa Māori entrepreneurship education, the effect that can have on whānau and Māori community development and suicide prevention, and asking the question, how does Ahikaa kaupapa Māori entrepreneurship education contribute to suicide prevention for taihui, whānau and communities? So what we did was we looked at rangatahi and or taihui and whānau who had completed Ahikaa entrepreneurship programs, and we looked at what in the area of practical outcomes and also their whakaaro, their stories since doing the entrepreneurship program might be relevant for suicide prevention. Basically, we had 55 sets of participants, rangatahi and whānau groups, and 203 self-evaluation surveys, which have been completed from Te Tauihu, Te Upoko, Te Ika, and Bay of Plenty, in particular Whakatane and Mahia. The methodology is set out here. I won't go through this, as I'm sure you can read it. Now, just to comment on the literature, a lot of the suicide prevention literature focuses on enhancing protective factors and reducing or mitigating risk factors. Our team believed that there was a danger in the central positioning of the research and interventions that were based on Western cultural and clinical foundations around risk and protective factors. We thought that this approach for our whānau needed to be treated with caution. And one of the reasons for this is that clinical research and interventions, while they may appear objective or unbiased, do carry at their core some cultural biases that can be highly influential and that can marginalise or silence our culture-centred analyses, our perspectives and our interventions. And the biases that I'm talking about in large part are around the primacy of Western individualistic conceptions of self, which are at the centre of clinical formulations. In contrast, Ahikaa has a holistic approach to development and wellbeing and is delivered to multiple generations of whānau and communities together. So here are some of our Ahikaa participants. And the outcomes that we had observed prior to getting into the suicide prevention research were observations of renewed hope, increased goal-setting behaviour, motivation, confidence, and Taiohi and whānau who've been doing the programs talked about transformations in their lives and within their whānau systems. So this is a little bit of background about the program. I won't go into that in detail. But research on the outcomes of successful entrepreneurship education generally find these 10 points, things like increased confidence, opportunity recognition and goal setting, motivation, successful pursuit of further education, training and employment. These are central things that should come out of successful entrepreneurship education. Now, when we're talking kaupapa Māori entrepreneurship education, such as the Ahikaa program, you'll see here the focus in mainstream entrepreneurship education tends to be what we're familiar with: individualistic, competitive, real focus on the for-profit area, book, web, pen, paper-based. It's very, it teaches about business and produces business knowledge, etc. Now, our Ahikaa programs have a much greater focus on group, team, whānau, hapu and community groups. We teach collaboration. We emphasise collaboration over competition. Social enterprise is at least as much valued as for-profit enterprises. We engage with and in business rather than teaching about business. And we emphasise the entrepreneurial mindset, which we talked about earlier in this presentation, and toolkits for business rather than providing just providing business knowledge. We also emphasise shared resources, people and whānau sharing resources as they develop through the program. So for us, Indigenous entrepreneurship education is about transforming whānau through economic knowledge and development, and using examples and stories and speakers and relationships that are real for us here in Aotearoa and in particularly our hard-to-reach communities. Research which has been done previously have identified several Māori suicide prevention success factors, and these have been highlighted in our literature review. I want to focus today on one of those in particular, and that is whānau transformation. So we'll come to that shortly. But in our interviews and the storytelling of participants in this research project, they identified a number of areas, and here are just a few of them before I get to some of the very key ones. You're able to read that for yourself, I hope. But there was a huge lift in confidence amongst people who completed the program. Motivation. Many of the participants were, probably about half of them were from gang whānau, were NEET, not in employment, education or training, and had no, something like 80% had no previous qualifications prior to getting this course, doing this course. These are some of the other outcomes: lifting in self-esteem. Now, these are some of the things that clinicians may seek to achieve in the counselling room, but this was done with whānau, with people from their communities, and it was done collectively. An important piece of suicide prevention, of course, is forward thinking and visioning of the future. And this is one of the other outcomes that people emphasise as being very helpful for them. How's my time? Hopefulness has been identified as absolutely key to suicide prevention, and that was also one of the outcomes that people identified from the entrepreneurship education programs. Now, the Ahikaa entrepreneurship programs are not specifically about learning Māori, and some of the people that came along didn't particularly want to know about anything Māori prior to attending the course. But we have found in running the programs that it's very important to actually reconceptualise what Māori culture is for many participants. So there is often a strong feeling that being Māori was about kapa, haka, reo, learning te reo, or about gangs and prison. But in looking at the Maui stories and looking at our entrepreneurial history and identity, people came to appreciate that being Māori was about being determined, about having an entrepreneurial spirit, about being creative, making a plan and making it happen. One of the features of the program is about identifying strengths and weaknesses, but in this context it was identifying strengths both as whānau and on individual or personal levels, which people said they really appreciated and often for the first time came to appreciate when doing the program. And again, as we've talked about the entrepreneurial mindset, which was about problem solving. When we have a problem, what are creative ways of solving it? How can we approach it as individuals or as a whānau or as a team, a group? And thinking ahead and setting goals for ourselves that we can take little steps towards and end up taking bigger strides. Another really important and probably unexpected outcome from the programs, which is very relevant to suicide prevention, was a strengthening of whānau. As I've said, very often it was whānau groups who participated in the program, sometimes 2-3 generations of whānau together, but also it was whanaungatanga that in the way that the programs were delivered. We tutors for the Ahikaa entrepreneurship programs are instructed to treat the participants as their whānau and the teaching location, teaching spaces as their homes, and to act in that way. When an important part of entrepreneurship activity is identifying our weaknesses or barriers that can prevent us from achieving our goals. Now, and that's again, that is as a whānau or as individuals. And as part of this, things like addictions or alcohol and drug problems were talked about in the programs, identified, and people are given assistance to seek to address these issues through external services. So it's that kind of holistic approach which facilitated people identifying their needs in terms of getting help and access to external services. Now I'm just going to focus now on one of the key findings, and that is whānau transformation. Now this was something that really had come to be observed over the 10-year history of the programs running, the entrepreneurship education programs. And it was something that people spoke about quite a bit when they were telling their stories of their experiences of the program and how it helped move them towards Mauri Ora, or coming out of kahupō, either individually or as whānau and communities, and moving towards Mauri Ora. People talked about how they now walk down the street in their communities together, and it felt as if the blinkers had been taken off their eyes when they saw an empty section, an empty property, an empty house. They would think of all the things that they could do with it. They could start a homework centre for youth. You know, how would they get the resources to do that? You know, they could set up a whānau coffee cart, you know, on this empty piece of space. They're looking at different types of opportunities that they had never seen before. And a number of people mentioned that they felt as if they'd been walking around blind because they had just never thought how to look for opportunities. And that's part of the entrepreneurial mindset. So the whānau transformation was a very key finding in regards to this research, and it's the influence of these Ahikaa entrepreneurship programs on whānau and suicide prevention within whānau. So just to summarise, basically, as I said at the start, I think we straddled, in a sense, two completely, quite different paradigms. The continuum moving from kahupō to Mauri Ora, and also the other more Western clinical orientation of risk and protective factors. Now, they weren't totally separate. There was some crossover. So things associated with kahupō can also be those that are identified as risk factors for suicide. And those are things that you will probably be familiar with. The transition that was undertaken by participants in the Ahikaa programs included things like Mauri Ora, decolonising our minds and developing positive cultural identity, rangatahi, as I've spoken about, building future visions and getting the tools and the skills to actually make things happen in business, in economics, and in our lives, both individually and collectively. Whanaungatanga, a lot of people talked about working for the first time with their whānau on creative projects, entrepreneurial projects, and grandparents recognising the things that their grandchildren brought in terms of technology, in terms of knowing how young people think, and young people recognising and talking for the first time often to the older whānau members about their wisdom and their knowledge of how people operate. Open communication and, of course, resilience, mistakes and failures as learning experiences that we can use in a positive fashion. Finally, the Mauri Ora elements or protective factors. that came out of the, that were identified by participants from these programs included things like the connectedness, whanaungatanga, intergenerational participation, self-acceptance, feeling useful, having a role to play, an ability to contribute, and being part of something and being able to give back. And of course, rangatiratanga is a central one to that in the way that we conceptualise it. So, in essence, if I just summarise, we found that the Ahikaa program, entrepreneurship education, with its holistic approach to development and well-being, along with its practical, educational and business focus, provided a program that feeds directly into suicide prevention at a community and whānau level. It's not the only program that is obviously going to do that, but what we're talking about is taking more of a collective and community-grounded public health approach to suicide prevention, particularly at the upstream and midstream levels. So where to from here? I mean, obviously, the researchers would like to continue with this research and in a action research way by taking Ahikaa programs into more communities and conducting more monitoring of outcomes over a medium and long-term basis, outcomes both for individuals, for whānau and for communities, over at least a decade, to really understand whether, and if so, how, doing programs such as the Ahikaa entrepreneurship education can produce, can lower suicide rates in at-risk and vulnerable communities. So I think that's the end of me. Now I need to get back to the other screen. Okay.
Yeah.
Hope that wasn't too fast.
Can you send it back to me?
I'm trying to, yes.
There are a couple of questions.
Yeah.
So in terms of accessing a fuller, full of detail of your research, Kath, have you thought how that might be accomplished by your research team in terms of dissemination and having something accessible besides what we've just recorded today and your PowerPoint?
Well, I think certainly publication, and particularly in our Indigenous forums. Members of the team are happy to come and speak to groups about the research, because for us it's been a very eye-opening exercise, and it's quite a different approach, and we think a very promising approach to suicide prevention that needs to be got out there. The Ahikaa entrepreneurship education model is about training people in the communities, particularly in hard to reach and vulnerable communities, to teach the programs themselves, so they can own the programs and use them within their communities as a tool and a method of motivating people and uplifting Mauri Ora and economic development.
And are we able to broadcast or to advertise your contact there, so those who are listening or those who hear you at a later date are able to contact you directly?
You want me to give out my email address and things now?
Is that okay? Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
The best contact person is Shamia. What's your email, Shamia?
Can we put it on your
Oh, yeah.
Your PowerPoint.
Oh, yeah. We'll put it on the PowerPoint. I'll send it through again with the contact details. Aroha mai.
Thank you. Well, thank you very much. Mihi anō ki a koe te whangau mō tō rangahau e akiaki I te whānau ki te tai atu ki te taumata, hei aha, hei oranga. So thank you, Kath, for your innovative research on education as a key factor to suicide prevention, absolutely. And we're privileged as Waka Hourua, Māori Suicide Prevention organisation, to have hosted you as one of our research projects, and look forward to your continued in terms of the publications, the articles, and also you taking it out to those who want to contact you. So nei rā no te mihi mai I a mātou. Ko te tikanga ka whaihua anō tātou katoa e whakarongo ana I ana kōrero Dr. Kath Love. Thank you very much for the time, and we look forward to next week, same time, same place.
Kia ora tāu. Thank you.
Kia ora. Kia ora.